In this final lecture about CSS, I will introduce you to the concept of responsive web design, which basically means to adapt layouts to smaller screens. Now, there are many tools that we can use for responsive web design, but the one that we are going to use, which is one of the simpler ones, is so-called media queries. So with media queries, we can identify points in the design based on the browser width in which things start to fall apart. So in which things start to look bad in our design. And then we can change the CSS based on that browser width. So let's actually find a point like that in our design. And so to start, let's make it really big. And so here, of course, everything works still fine, right? And it keeps working fine for some time. And that's also because we already actually did many things in order to ensure that our page works on all browser width. For example, this max width property that we used here ensures that the page works on screens that are smaller than those 1500 pixels. So remember that when we used just width and set it to 115 or actually 1500, then our page and our user interface got way too wide, right? But anyway, let's try to identify a point in which the design is no longer that great. And I think we are starting to see one right here. So this text here is like getting really tall, and more than half of this row is only occupied here with this tag and with these buttons. But then there's a lot of like empty content around there. So that's really not ideal. And so we can choose a nice number, for example, 1200 pixels, and then we can change the code at this point. So what we're going to do is to basically have this here on the entire width and then have these two below it. So just what we have, well, here we cannot see it because I zoomed out, but when we zoom in, then it looks the same as the one that we are building right now. And so again, what I want to do now is to place these one after the other. And so with this, we are back to having some space. So let's do that right now. So what we want to change is this row item here. So this list item, which is called a fact, right? So anywhere in our code, as long as it's after this fact, we can write a so-called media query. And for that, we write media and then max width 1200 pixels, because that's the point at which we now want to change some code. So basically, for all the browser width that are below 1200 pixels, we will want this code here to apply. So we can now again select the fact, and then we will write some code that will override code from here. And as always, just to test this out, let's bring back our red background color. Okay. So right now we are at a width of 1200, but watch what happens once we dip below that. Well, nothing happened somehow. Maybe I need to reload. Yeah, I had a problem again where I need to reload. But anyway, let's put it bigger again. And so you see that now it's normal, and watch here this corner. So once we reach the 1200, then bam, the color changes to red. And so this style here is now overriding this one that we had before. All right. So, of course, the background color should not really change, but instead what we want to change is this alignment here. So remember how actually when we first talked about flexbox, I told you that we can even change the orientation of the whole thing. So basically the orientation in which the alignment happens. So by default, when we turn on flexbox by doing this, the items get placed side by side automatically, right? And the reason for that is that the flex direction is by default set to row. Flex direction, again, is by default set to row. And so when I do this now, of course, nothing changed because that's the default. However, we can also set it to different values. So we can have row reverse, which will then completely reverse the order, but that's not really so interesting here. What's interesting here for us is that at this point, we can now actually change it to a column. So flex direction column. And there you see, now we are back to having more space. So this now has all the space, and especially here, that is really, really visible. So let's remove that background color. And now as we change the gap property, for example, to 12 pixels, halving it from 24, then this space here decreases. Because of course, gap was first the horizontal space, but now it is the vertical space. So between this and this. So now we set it to 12, and now there's a bit less space as we were having too much. Okay, now in technical terms, what we did here was to switch the so-called main axis with the so-called secondary axis. But as I told you before, we will not go deep into that here in this crash course. The only thing that I'm going to tell you is that align items before was basically vertical alignment, while now that we switched to a column, it is horizontal alignment. Okay, so that's maybe a bit confusing, but what this means is that if we now override align items and set it to flex end, then all of this here shifts to the end. So basically to the right. And with that, we are actually done. Now to make our lives a little bit easier, we will now use this device toolbar here that we had before. So again, make sure that you set responsive here. So instead of one of these devices that you could also choose, and then probably you want a 75% here. And so now it's a lot easier here. So watch for a breakpoint, and actually up here our breakpoint is marked. So Google Chrome discovered that we have this max width condition, and so therefore it is right here, and we can click there and then it goes exactly there. And if we go a little bit up actually, then it goes to the original state, and once we go here, it goes to our modified state that we just created. And of course we could also inspect it here. Let's see this fact. Yeah, because here we can now see the media query also being applied, right? And of course, also now, when we do this, you can see the gap here vertically, and of course that the items are one after another. And if we removed the flex direction, then yeah, it would look like this. The flex end is still being applied, and so now it's moved down. But again, as we rotate here, basically the main axis with flex direction column, it moves up here. Okay, so that's one of the changes that we needed to make. But now let's keep going, because I'm sure it will break again at some point. And immediately, actually, it starts right here. So like at 1100. So basically at this point, we already need to fix the form. Well, maybe we can stretch it to 1000, even though it's not, well, it's not really pretty, right? But it also doesn't create a vertical scroll. So yeah, let's just do it at 1000 pixels. I mean, no user will exactly use the page at 1000 pixels. So it might be something else like 1024 or some value like that. So let's go to the form, which is somewhere up here. And let's place our media query here. Now the media queries could be anywhere. They could even be in another file, but I like to keep them close to each of these elements that we are actually changing. Again, what matters the most is that it is actually after the original definition. Okay, so max width of 1000 pixels, and we could do a lot more. So in real world responsive development, we do a lot more. So as the page gets smaller, we change all the font sizes, we change all the paddings, the margins. So for example, we could really decrease the padding here on the page. And actually, why not? We can do that. So the padding is, it is here on the body. So let's decrease that all a little bit. Actually, just copy it so we know our base. And so with this, you can also see that each of the media queries can, of course, has as many styles as we want. So let's move the 64 down to 48, and this one to 32. And let's check that out. So you saw that there's a small jump, but it does make a difference. It gives us a little bit more width to work with. But anyway, yeah, as I was saying, in the real world, we do a lot more changes, and we also do use some other tools, but media queries is the easiest one, I guess. You can do some stuff with grids, and also flexbox can be even more advanced. But yeah, for now, let's just stick to this. So what we will do is the same as before. So what we had side by side, we will now stack, basically. So we will now also stack these form elements. So again, we will use flex direction, set it to column. Okay. But now I guess we should have these elements a little bit wider, right? So basically occupying all the possible width. So we can do that with flexbox again. So remember when we changed to flex direction column that the align is now vertically, or actually like horizontally. I mean, it's a bit confusing again, but right now the align items is set to center, which is why they are now in the center here, right? But we can set it back to the default, which is stretch. So align items, stretch, and there we go. So now it takes up all the space, at least the button here. These ones do not, because we actually gave them a width. So we need to now basically override that width. So we need to select those input elements. However, they are first defined below. So we actually need to cut that and put it here all the way to the end. I guess we should have the entire form down here. Let's actually do that. It's getting a bit too confusing, jumping around this file all the time. So do that here. Let's do that here. Then let's just create a comment for the form. Okay, so the problem is that here we have this width well defined, but we need to override that now. So we want to set it to auto now. So to override, in this case, the width is to set it back to being basically automatically calculated. And so with this, we have it nicely overwritten here. Okay, so that is fixed as well. Looks quite nice. I mean, here it moves to 2 lines, but that's not a problem. So up here, all this way, it's really nice. But down here, however, we start getting new problems. So I would say like around maybe 800. Well, let's actually say 900. So there comes a point where it doesn't make a lot of sense anymore that these are side by side. So on a small screen like a phone, usually you always have everything stacked. There's no 2-column layouts anymore. And so let's do that here as well. And remember how for this layout here, we used CSS Grid. And with CSS Grid, it's actually a lot less confusing than by changing the flex direction like we did here. So let's go to the main part. That's somewhere up here. Yeah, right here. So media, and then max width 900 pixels. Let's again select the main. The display grid stays the same, But as I was just saying before, we now only want one column. So all we need to do is to redefine this. So let's paste it here. And now we only have one column. So delete that. We want one column that occupies the entire space. And that's it. So we have the buttons, and then we have what we want here. So that's really cool, really beautiful. So our design now works even on pretty small screens. Now this part, of course, wouldn't really have been necessary in order to build this application, but I thought it would be really fun to also include this real world scenario where you need to basically optimize your page for different width. Even though it's not perfect, at least now you know how to do it. And with this, we finished this section. So congratulations, you now already have some pretty good CSS and HTML skills, I would say. So great job on getting those and for sticking with this course. Next up, we will take care of setting up a very small backend where we can store the data that we will later actually fetch into our database. So right now we have been using some fake data basically, but of course at some point we will want to load that data from somewhere. So real data coming from a real server. And so that is the topic of our next section. So that will make this app start to feel like a real world application. And so it's a very small section. So it's just like 4 or 5 videos. So waste no time and go there right now. See you soon.